Hello folks, my name is Mark, this is UCD Videos, how you guys doing? So this is about the legend of Nintendomad and Ura Zelda. And those of you out there who have never heard of this, it's an interesting story that I have a little bit of involvement with personally. So without further ado, what is Ura Zelda? Well, Ura Zelda was a game that was supposed to be the sequel to the Ocarina of Time on Nintendo 64, right? And what it was is that it was going to come out on the Nintendo 64 disk drive, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a peripheral that attaches to the bottom of the Nintendo 64, like it sits on top, right? And it had writable discs that you would, put in, right? And because what it was is back in the day, back in the 90s, Nintendo didn't want to commit to the CD format because piracy was always a major problem for them. Even back then, even back in the 90s, they would have, they would lose millions and millions of dollars due to unlicensed pirate carts made in China and stuff like that, pirate Famicom carts, that kind of thing. And they didn't want to commit to CDs because, as soon as somebody cracked it, there'd just be a million pirate CDs out there with all their games on it. So that's why the Nintendo 64 had cartridges, and they decided to make this, disk drive add-on with a proprietary format. Unfortunately, that also was a problem because the disk drive failed. Right, it came out, it was too expensive, and it came out too late in the console's life cycle. And in fact, I don't think they ever even released it in the United States. It just was released in Japan, and it only had like 10 games on it. Right, so that was a major failure on their part. And because it failed so hard, they never released the Zelda game that they made, right? And pieces of it went on to be in Majora's Mask, and then also in the Master Quest Zelda Master Quest game that was released on the GameCube, years later, right? So whatever happened to the game, the Zelda game, they call it Ura Zelda now. That's like, whatever happened to Ura Zelda? Well, supposedly, now this is the rumor, right? The rumor is there's a guy named Nintendomad who had a copy of it, and then Nintendo hired a hitman to kill him, right? So that the game would never be released, right? That's the urban legend, and that's not what happened. Okay, what happened was about 10 years ago now, actually. I think it was in 2009. Nintendomad was in contact with the person that had the game, right? So he never had it himself. Nintendomad never actually had the copy in his possession. He was in contact with the owner in order to try to get him to sell it, right? To sell the proto to us. Okay. Now, when I say to us, this is what I mean. So Nintendomad was part of a pretty tight group of collectors, prototype collectors, people who would collect unreleased video games, and then also dev hardware and just obscure shit in general, right? And I was part of that group, right? I mean, I was never as hardcore as Nintendomad was, but I did have a couple of protos here and there, and I've since sold all of that shit because it's too expensive, and I'd rather play the video games. You have to have a lot of technical knowledge in order to get these things to even run. And then if you do manage to get it run, it's like a build of a game that's not even finished. And it's like, so it's more for, the scene is more for like hackers and like programmers and game designers and stuff like that, right? People who are like able to appreciate the work that was put into a video game and like to see it in different, stages of development, right? But there was also a lot of games that were never even released, that you could only, if you wanted to play them, you had to get a proto, right, back in the day. And so, but I was involved in this community, and I interacted with Nintendomad a couple of times here and there on the forums and such. I didn't know him personally. I never met him. You know, I didn't know his name. I think he's British, actually. He was British. You know, he actually is dead now, but we'll come to that later. So I didn't know him. I can't vouch for him as a person, but what I could vouch for was his credibility as a collector, right? So we would often trade these things in between ourselves. You know, here and there, people would sell protos amongst to each other and that kind of thing, and they would cost hundreds of dollars, right? Because these things are expensive. Okay, now occasionally you may find one on, you know, a public auction site like eBay or something. You might find something out there, you know, a prototype game of XYZ, right? Usually if you see that, it'll be from a company that's long gone out of business. Right. Because no one tends to sell games that are, you know, still active IPs, right? Nobody tends to sell a game from like a company like Nintendo or Capcom or something, because those companies are still around, and you know they'll fucking sue you because you're not supposed to have that, right? And like, so let's say for example you have an unreleased version of Super Mario 3, you know, that was completely different than the one that was released. You know, for example, hypothetically, right? Well, the only way you would have that is that if somebody stole it, right? Since Nintendo's still in business, right? That meant that someone that either worked there or worked with them or somehow got their hands on it and, you know, managed to smuggle it out for their own collection or whatever. And that means that you're receiving stolen property, right? So there could be a lot of legal problems involved in owning something like that. You know, like, I don't think you can go to prison or anything, but, you know, they could definitely make your life, you know, a living hell, right? You know, sue you or something, right? So that's why you never see, like, prototypes from big companies on for sale online. And plus, I think, like, eBay, for example, will pull auctions for these types of things because there's laws against them, especially in Japan. There's laws against, you know, selling prototypes and stuff, right? But, you know, the thing is that there are legitimate ways of getting your hands on this stuff without having to buy it from another collector, without having to steal it. You know, you may, you know, occasionally come across these things in the wild, right? It has been known to happen. It's very, very rare, but it has been known to happen. Like, for example, one of the guys in this forum found a Panasonic M2 at a fucking garage sale, right? There's no joke. Now, I don't know if you guys know what an M2 is, but it's the successor to the Panasonic 3DO game system that was never released, right? One of the guys there goes to a garage sale. Turns out that it was like, you know, these two old people that were selling their son's computer stuff, and their son happened to work for fucking 3DO, and he had a working M2 prototype, right? That's real shit. That really happened, right? That's really out there. There really is a guy out there with an M2 that he found at a goddamn garage sale, you know, a piece of unreleased hardware that's worth possibly thousands of dollars that he picked up for like $100. So getting back to the story here, what did he tell us about Ura Zelda? Well, he said that it was a complete build, right? He didn't say if the actual game was finished or not, but he said it was playable. And it was the 64 DD version, you know, it wasn't anything for the GameCube or anything like that. And it had a generated master quest that was different every time. So he didn't say what that meant, right? Whether that meant that layouts were different or items were in different places or you had different quests. He didn't say anything. He just said that it was a generated master quest that was different every time you played it. And it retained a lot of the features that you would see in Majora's Mask, a lot of the textures, things like that. It had a mask trading game. He didn't elaborate, just said there was a mask trading game. That there were 2 extra dungeons in it that are not in Master Quest. And then also it had Mario Artist capability. So as to what that was, I don't know. I mean, I assume it meant that you could make your own custom masks or something, but he didn't say. And then the last thing he said is that it was on a blue disc, which meant that you would need a dev hardware to actually play it. So it wasn't on a Nintendo 64 disc, you know, a disk drive disc. It was on a blue disc. And that there's apparently two types of development kits. So there's like the earlier development kit is the one you needed in order to play this. That's what he said, right? This is what happened. So he actually made a post in a public forum, some other forum, which I'm not sure exactly which one it was. I think it was the Neo Geo forums, but I don't know. He made a public post that a bunch of people saw and was talking about it. And then he took that down immediately because he didn't want people trying to track down the owner of the prototype, right? Because we were going to negotiate to get this thing released, right? And he didn't want to spook him because conceivably whoever owned this could get in legal trouble, right? Was the number one reason. And then, so that kind of got tongues wagging though out there. Somebody saw this thread, and then rumors started flying around, right? So while that's happening, he came to us, and then we started talking about it, and we were going to raise money to get it released, right? Now, why do you mean raise money? Well, first off, the guy was going to sell it to him, right? He was in negotiations with the owner to sell it to him, Nintendomad, right? But we wanted to, raise, so the fundraiser would have been to compensate Nintendomad in order to release the ROM, right? So these things, like I said, are very expensive, right? Hundreds, if not thousands of dollars sometimes. And so we would do this in our group. We would occasionally have fundraisers in order to get enough money to compensate the owner of the prototype so that he would dump the ROM and not lose money, right? And we did this a couple of times, actually. We did one of them that I was actually personally involved with was Nightmare Busters on the Super Nintendo, right? Which, if you haven't played it, there's actually a legit release of that now. There's this company that takes old games that were never released and puts them out for older systems, right? So you can actually go buy Nightmare Busters on an actual physical cartridge and play it on your Super Nintendo, right? And you have us to thank for that, right? We're the ones that got the owner of that to dump that game, right? And without us, you wouldn't be able to play Nightmare Busters. In fact, you can thank me because I'm the one that actually, organized that fundraiser for Nightmare Busters. Me personally, I'm the one that made that happen. So, I don't know. You don't have to believe me, but it's true. Anyway, so we were going to do the same thing here for Ura Zelda, right? In fact, we were like very excited about that. One of the guys there said, this is the most important thing ever, right? So we were like, jazzed in, and I think the asking price was $3,000, which is really not that much if you think about it. I mean, shit, we would have raised that in a second, right? So, anyway, but, they didn't want it getting out to the larger gaming community because, first off, it would have caused a shitstorm. And then secondly, it would have got Nintendo's lawyers looking around, right? Because apparently they do kind of monitor these groups to make sure that no one is releasing their stuff, right? Apparently that's a real thing. So, because rumors were flying around, right? Because Nintendomad made the mistake of posting in a public forum before coming to us, right, first. That got rumors flying, and the seller backed out because he didn't want to, to risk any legal repercussions over that, which is totally understandable, right? So keep in mind, Nintendomad never gave us a name, never told us who this guy was, right? Never told us if it was, a man or a woman. Never said if it was a collector or a former employee or anything. He kept it completely vague. Right. So there really is no evidence out there of who this person is. All we know is that it's, that's someone who's Japanese. That's it. Right. No other evidence about who this guy is, where he's from. Did he work in the game industry? Did he do this? Did he do that? Did he just buy it someplace? Did he find it in a thrift store somewhere? Nothing. We don't know where it came from. So, and then, a few years later, after all this happened, right, Nintendomad actually died. He died of a brain aneurysm, right? And that's where the rumor of him being murdered came from. Okay. But no, he really was a real person, and he really is deceased, And all of the prototypes, his collection, we don't know what happened to it. Because he had a lot of stuff, his own personal collection, and I know that he had some games that have never been dumped as well, right, in his collection, and we don't know what happened to it, Like I said, I didn't know who he was personally. I know some of the other guys knew who he was personally, but I didn't, And as far as I know, it all went to his family, So who knows? They could still have all of his stuff in boxes in the attic somewhere, just waiting to be released one day. So, here's the thing, right? Could it all be BS? Could he have been making it up? Maybe. I guess there is a chance that it was all baloney, right? And that he was just doing it for attention. But, like I said, I didn't know him personally. But I can tell you he had a very good rep. Okay. And that's what really mattered more in this community, right? He never ripped anybody off. He always paid, he always upheld his part of the bargain in any trade, right? He was a nice person, and he genuinely knew what he was talking about. That's another thing, too. When we would talk about prototypes and stuff, right, and talk about hardware and that kind of thing, he knew his shit. He knew what he was talking about, right? He definitely had the knowledge, and he wasn't a flake. See, we had a way of filtering out losers and flakes and stuff. They didn't tend to stick around very long, right? And he was one of the core guys, which is kind of sad to say because it's been, a decade, and they're not even nearly as active as they used to be. Like, I still kind of check in every once in a while, and I don't see any of the core people from back then around anymore. There's a few of them, but not very many. So that's kind of sad, and, could it all have been a hoax or whatever? Who knows? But I highly doubt it. I think that it was real personally, right? Which tells me that somewhere out there, somebody has a copy of Ura Zelda, and for whatever reason has just decided not to leak it. And who knows, maybe this person might show up again one day, just, keep hunting, I guess. Keep hunting, keep asking around, keep talking about it. And who knows, maybe whoever this person is one day might feel safe and, might feel like now's the time and I'm not going to be like, harassed illegally, right? Or lose a job over this or something like that. And they might need some money and they might want to release it, and the opportunity may come, it may take another 10 years, who knows? So anyway, that's all I got, folks. Adios.